Well, welcome again to a great session of Clifton News here live in Clifton Market. We got Jeff Brown here, manager of Clifton Market, and he's going to give us an update on the market. What's up?
Finally, after months and months and months, the things closed on the store. They're the owners now, so now it's like the hard work of getting all the capital improvements done, getting working with the vendors to get the shelves restocked. Probably there'll be a reset to kind of make more sense of things. A lot of items that people have been really wanting that we haven't had for a while. We're working with all our vendors on that. And then, like I said, the capital improvements. Where they'll be working on repaving the parking lot, fixing some of the cosmetic things around the store, but those are the big things coming up for now. So that's the things that you'll see and notice for sure. But and of course always stuff behind the scenes.
What's it like to be a manager?
It's a lot of work. I was the meat department manager, and I thought that was a lot of work. And then when I became the general manager, I realized how easy I had it in the meat department. But I love it. It's it's always something different every day. I never am in a routine. It's always something that I a problem that I have to solve, or even getting positive feedback from customers, things like that. It's all worthwhile. So, and I think now going forward with the things, the store is just going to take off. So, and I'm really excited about it.
Well, great, and we got CliftonFest coming up October 4th and 5th. What's the market doing for?
We'll actually have ukulele player will be here in the cafe playing. We sponsored one of the sidewalk artists, so they'll be doing a chalk art out in front of the store, and then we'll have some specials and samples in the deli and the bakery for people to come in and try and join in.
Great.
Yep,
that's great. Well, I know it's tough, running the day-to-day operations. And how's the morale of the troops here?
I think, with the sale and everything, that's kind of improved. Everybody's just been working so hard for, all year, really, since the beginning of the year, and to finally see that the sales gone through and the changes are coming, that I think it's kind of given everyone a boost. So we'll just keep on pushing like we always do and go from there.
Well, good, Jeff. Well, thank you. And
good to see you, Tom.
You're back to the
hard
work of running the store.
Right. Okay.
Thank you,
We'll
Jeff.
see you.
All right, Jeff. And our next guest is Geoff Gelke. He's here, let's choke over here. Move over a little bit there. Yeah, there we go. And he's been writing articles in the Chronicle about the carriage houses, and he's got a nice poster of the doors of Clifton. Right. So what made you want to get involved in writing about the carriage houses?
I've just always had a great passion since birth for horses, architecture, and essentially history. So I've always, since I was very young, was able to quiz older adults, and I had a grandparents, grandmother, grandfather who actually grew up in Clifton in the 1890s. First-hand account of what went on back then, and I've always kept that in mind and developed over the years. Where now I just wanted to kind of bring that back and kind of share it with others, because it's kind of a lot of oral history, but many times that is all that you have, and but I know it's all authentic, and I know what went on in the area during the time from people who lived then, and so I've always loved it, and I'm always snooting around old buildings and so forth, and so I kind of put the whole thing together of history, architecture, and horses, and you wind up with kind of the transportation stuff. The first article I wrote was on the public stables in the area. The second was on the streetcars, how they developed Clifton, without which we wouldn't be here. and then thirdly, the big private stables that were in Clifton. And I'm working on a couple other articles that will focus again on that area from a little different perspective. And had a lot of fun doing it. It's a lot of research, but that's kind of a labor of love too. So,
But when you think about the horse-drawn carriage here and this is the suburbs of Cincinnati. It must have been quite pastoral to go for your carriage house from one large house to another. I read. Mr. Siegfried said that there wasn't any fences between the properties. They were all just sort of winding carriage rides. And if you want to get an idea of what Clifton was like back in the 1890s, you just have to go to Spring Grove Cemetery.
Yeah. Because
the same architect, Mr. Schroffs, designed Spring Grove, but Spring Grove has been preserved. But Clifton has been parceled up, and all the wandering carriage ride tracks. I'd like to get a picture of that, of the original paths, and also the original omnibus track.
Yeah, well, the omnibuses ran kind of erratically, but the first streetcar didn't come into Clifton until in the 1880s, 1888, 8 and 9, when they had the first electric streetcars. Prior to that, they ran right up to the border at Jefferson, and so you had to go up to Jefferson to catch which was then it was a horse car, which is a streetcar drawn by a team of horses. And but when they invented the electric streetcar in 1889, that just opened up a whole new vista. Then they could just lay tracks all over and go for it. And that's what the developers were looking for, is how do you transport people in mass from, say, Clifton or other areas to the basin to work and back at night. And so that became what drove all the big apartment houses that we see on Middleton and Thrall and all the other streets that were developed all around the streetcars. So you had a lot of people who were tenants, and so the big mansions, they didn't need that. They had their private carriages and so forth, and that was no problem. But for the rank and file, they needed a streetcar transportation, and that's what really kind of brought things. And that went till 1949, and then the buses took over that function, and have done well also. But that's how we got so many apartments and flats, as they call them, built. Because people weren't going to walk to downtown. So that's where you see most of the building going on in the 1890s to say 1910 or 15 is where the massive building went on because of the streetcars. If it weren't for the streetcars, it just wouldn't have happened,
Well, the original horse-drawn omnibus, how many passengers did it have?
Well, some of them were even manufactured. Cincinnati had almost 60 carriage manufacturing, some large, some small. But the omnibus was kind of common throughout the country, the configuration. I have a photograph of one in an article, and you could carry maybe 8 people. It's like you would go in the back, and you'd have 2 bench seats facing each other. And some of them in some cities even had a top deck with like the English buses have, with a little winding stair up the back to get on top. But they wouldn't have had that in Cincinnati, but that would be something more like New York or whatever. But so the omnibuses were pretty slow and stodgy, and then they were, essentially proprietorships, so they weren't too well controlled, and had some main routes. One came into Clifton, but I don't think you would have any kind of speed or regularity that the streetcar offered. So it was always questionable if that could ever support the kind of development that the streetcar did, which, as I mentioned, was all the big apartment and flat buildings and so forth.
Well, when they had the 8-passenger horse-drawn omnibus, how often did they run?
Well, I don't know. I presume they would run it, hopefully every hour or hour and a half, something like that. But the streetcars were, you could run them faster, and I can't remember what the schedules were. I grew up when they were still around here, but I think they would run every 20 to 30 minutes, during rush hour. So that became much more predictable and reliable than the omnibus, which was never really meant for big, fast transit at all, but more of a fill-in. But they were running all through Quarryville and Mount Auburn, Walnut Hills, and so forth, and not too much here. There wasn't the kind of population here at that time. The population really started to explode here in the 1880s and 90s, really. So that's why you don't see a lot of activity with omnibus in the area, but nevertheless, there were some, of course.
Well, I'm kind of trying to get an idea of the track, and maybe they came up Clifton, went up to Jefferson, down to Vine Street, and went on downtown, and that was the loop.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's several, and there's a lot of good books written in the library on by Mr. Kelly, I believe his name was, back in the 70s, and they has all the routes that were laid out that go all over the city, and when they came about and so forth. And I got most of my research from there, where the car barns were. They had to be. They would store the horse. In other words, if the incline came up Clifton Hill, there was a car barn at the top, and there they would have, a horse car with the teams of horses. People get on, and there they would take out over Ohio Avenue to wherever they're going down in as far as to the border of Clifton, but or into the zoo was a popular destination. So the inclines also, facilitated that. If you had, of course, the electric streetcars largely got around that, and although there were some cable cars up Gilbert and up Sycamore Hill, that they would attach a cable that ran up through the middle of the street to pull them up. And the other solution was to have inclines, in which there were 4 or 5, and they were built in the 1870s primarily. And when they got off, you got onto a streetcar and went about your way that way, horse car, should I say. And but with a lot of the electric streetcars, they could climb Clifton Avenue and go up Vine Street. So those are pretty good inclines themselves. I don't know that anyone went up Sycamore, without a cable, but the other places were able to be scaled by an electric car. For example, down at the end of Middleton Avenue goes a pretty good drop down there to McAlpin, and they went down and up that. And I remember as a kid at Clifton School, they could hear those streetcars climbing that hill. And it was kind of a screechy sound. I'm sure the wheels spun and so forth. And but nevertheless, they made, because the electric motors, some of them had 2 electric motors in them, and they were driven and usually by cables above, and they had a lot of power to them, so they could climb a pretty good grade. So even more so than the horses, and so that's why it further enhanced streetcar travel.
I guess to get an idea of what it sounded like, even today, you can hear the rail car switching in the yard by the Union Terminal.
Yep.
And that's the noise that you would hear all over the city.
Yeah, sort of a clickety clack. And I remember as they come up and down Clifton Avenue, you could hear them coming. It was sort of a clickety clackety clackety clack, and it was kind of almost endearing, I think, to the riders. It wasn't an annoyance. It was kind of it was kind of homey and a warm feeling, and you could hear them coming that way too. So it was a kind of a romantic thing, compared to a belching bus or something, which is nothing to behold at all.
Yeah, I guess they need to. It would have been nice if when they put the streetcar downtown, they would have made it like an old antique streetcar. But we got a modern one now.
Yeah, I often thought they could do better in that regard too. Was is to do a replica or even a horse-drawn, but having a super modern big city streetcar, I think it might be proven a little bit overkill for the area.
Yeah, they had a big story recently about the streetcars that were popular. They're successful in other cities, and I think the big key is that they're free in like Kansas City. But here we charge.
I think they'd have to be free. I mean, it'd be some inducement, to really use them. I don't know what the fares are to go on there, but they're not. It's not free. There was discussion of it, but I don't think it ever went anywhere.
Well, since you started writing in the Chronicle about the carriage houses, now I drive around town and I can almost spot the old horse barns. Like at the top of a ravine, there's a beautiful old horse barn there, and they got horses in the facade.
A patrol house, a police patrol. There's a lot of photographs of that back in this day. But the policemen rode horseback out of there and patrolled Clifton down here. And I remember talking to one as a kid. I mean, this was a guy in his 80s or 90s back in the 50s. And he said, oh, yeah, he used to patrol down through Clifton. And he would even go in and stoke people's fires at night for a fee, who didn't want to get up and stoke the fires. And, he had a very close relationship, but that idea of being on horseback had a lot of, it gave a lot of authority, but it enabled them to travel a lot of a distance over areas that you couldn't use a bicycle or something on, so they could go through all the estates up through Lafayette and so forth and be, right in key. So
back in the horse-drawn carriage days, what was the surface of the road? Just dirt?
The road?
Yeah. What did they travel on? What was the road like?
Oh, well, I mean, initially mud, but then they came through macadam, which was a crushed rock. So that was, I think that came about, the English invented that about 1840 or so. It got very popular, so that all the road contractors started copying that, and that would be pounded into the mud and create somewhat of a, some sort of a base that you could drive a carriage over. And of course, in the city, granite block and ceramic brick or whatever, some cobblestone is kind of hard to find, but there is some down in the West End on a little back alley street that's absolutely perfect. And it has like the perfect rounded stones, and that's what they did because the water would have drainage that way, and it would not be muddy ever. And that's bent down on Horace Street, Horace. There's a back alley. You can, if you want to see what real cobblestone looks like. And but the old granite block, which was like what they've redone in front of Music Hall, is what you would have seen with railroad tracks, But I was just reading an account back then where a lot of people who drove good horses would avoid streets with streetcar tracks because it would tend to you get a carriage wheel kind of stuck in there, or it wasn't good footing for a horse. So it wasn't the best for other people, but it was good for walking across, and and certainly be fine for carriages, but loud. And so that was one of the big issues years ago, was loud carriage wheels and wagon wheels, squeaking. So people would, that much more than probably autos now. It was loud, and so people accounted for that in their planning and building, and it would it would certainly wake you up. So there was a lot of sound design that people don't know about, that they did to dampen that sound at night, because you can imagine a big farm cart, steel rims coming down, pretty loud.
Well, the wheels were steel rimmed.
Rims, yeah.
And when did they come into putting tracks on the hillside, and then the horses would pull an omnibus that was on the tracks, and the horses would walk in the middle of the track, I guess. Where there was two horses usually.
Yeah, well, that goes back to about 1858 or so. Was the first one in Cincinnati, and that was just in the basin area, and where they had horses and of course they laid tracks for the car, the street car, shall we say, more accurately called a horse car, and they would hitch a team of horses to the front of that or the back, because they wouldn't. To get the end of the line, you can't turn around very well, so you just go. The driver walks to the other side, drops the pin on the hitch, puts the horses on the other end, and goes back on that line. So that was done as early as 1858, and that was used pretty much all over. And it got in up to the higher areas here, like into Coreyville, Clifton, Walnut Hill, but they didn't lay tracks down into the Clifton, as far as I can research, until about 1889. So, and that's because the electric car was there.
Yeah. Well, one of your other projects is researching the doors of Clifton. You got a great poster here. Why don't you bring it over and let everybody see it? Yeah, I think this is beautiful frame print of the doors. You can see a little bit of it. But
yeah, I was out doing my research for the articles, and I thought, these doors are so gorgeous. I'm just going to take some pictures of them because I think they're interesting to study. And I got so interested, I did another one on the old basin area of Cincinnati, which is a bit larger, a little different coloration, and it's I think very, very, very intense and rich and looking. And but I think Clifton Designs should have one. And I also started work on the doors of Walnut Hills, which has a lot of hidden gems over there. And they're all try to have some sort of historic or architectural merit to them. Otherwise, why would you take a picture of them? So there's only a few common doors, and that's because they might have a lot of color to them or something unusual about them. But I'm just trying to, in fact, my whole little effort here is to drive historical interest into Clifton with people, and I invite people, if you want to do or can contribute. I call myself the history buffs, and anybody. I've had several people who, like to participate or contribute and so forth, and that's fine. So it's just like an informal history buff association, and so we're going to try to push that. And I've got several articles on the desk to work on and so forth. So it gives me in retirement a great deal of satisfaction to do which I've always looked at, I've always envied, and now a chance to kind of do something and share it. And So far, there are people, of course, who are avid history buffs, and others not so much. But I tried to make it so that everyone could find it somewhat attractive in their own right. Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to have to make a list of these doors and then you could put it on the back of it, and then people could have a quiz to name all the doors. How many doors in this poster?
Well, this one's 30, and the next one's got, I think, 36 or so. One of the issues is if you get them too small, you can't see the detail. If you have too few, you don't have visual interest, and then you have to have a color balance of it too. So if it hangs on the wall, you can say, "Oh, yeah, that's very pretty," And so it's kind of a challenge, but it's a nice artistic challenge. I've been working with Rob and Color on that. They know their way around color and printing and design. So they've helped me with that. And
Some of these doors are carriage house doors.
yes, well, I think that's because they're unique. They're different. You won't see them anywhere else. They're not just barn doors. They're clearly designed carriage houses, and I think that's part of the whole ethos of Clifton is you've got to give them their credit and their place, and so I think they deserve a shot.
It's I can point out also that these doors are also all custom-made homes, and that's why they're so ornate. And there's a real rich history in each one of the castles and so forth.
Yeah. Well, take a look at it, and then I can always tell you where they are. But some of them, are kind of really one-offs. There's a lot of common doors that I think were, let's say, houses built. So many of the houses in Clifton built around the turn of the century. Merely the contractors that got the door out of suppliers, and they said, "Send me over a 3-piece ornate," and there it came, and that's what you got. And even then they tried to be a little different, but they were still kind of lumped into, I would say, the same general design of having 2 side panel windows and one above, maybe with the stained glass on. So those are all over the place, and I do have some there, but there's so many of the other ones that are completely one-off. They're done by, designed by Hannaford, Tinsley, and so forth. Actually have sketches of them. They sketched them out, said this is what we want, and the carvers, such as Fry and all those big name carvers, that was their task to build the door, and but a lot of them, so very few of them on here would be what I would call stock doors, where you pull them out of stock somewhere. It's like you go to Lowe's today and they have thousands of doors, and they're almost always the old standard cross and Bible doors, which is okay, but it just doesn't belong in most houses, And so anyway,
Yeah, we live in an old 1902 house, and it was built as a rental, so it didn't have all the ornate parts of these doors. Some of these are pretty incredible. Now you'll probably be showing this at CliftonFest.
Yes, I'll have this one and the the one on downtown Cincinnati as well. And I don't think I'll have Ball and Hills ready. That's still in the works. But those are the 3 neighborhoods. Mount Auburn, but Mount Auburn has some great doors, but very few. So much of Mount Auburn is just gone, but it was certainly a place, one of the first places, and I think it's comparable to Clifton in that they were places where people came to get away from the stench of the basin, and have a summer house, and so that's what it was made for, and of course back then Clifton, I think the the founding fathers of Clifton kind of discovered this was a unique place, and we want to keep it that way. So they had strict ordinances about bars and drinking and driving horses too fast and everything. They just wanted to keep it as a nice resort area almost at that time. Of course, they lost out, in the 1870s and 80s when they started to build more. But back in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, you had some of the big mansions being built, and they were really, palatial places on large tracts of land, 70, 80 acres, and that sort of thing. So they were quite something. And I often, wished I could go back and look at those. And but I do have some accounts of them, and that's subject of the article as well.
Well, that brings up the story of the Mill Creek was here too, and of course that was the main thoroughfare in the old days because it was level, and you could go up the Mill Creek and the canal from the city, and then come up Old Ludlow, and you'd be able to access this area. But what was the smell like down there in the canal? Do you have any history of that?
No, I don't. But the canal, of course, that was an issue. They had to have reservoirs every so often, like St. Mary's, Ohio. That big lake is a reservoir for the canal, and they had some close to here. One was close down to the bottom of Clifton Hill Reservoir, so they had to keep letting water in. They wanted to have a water flow, however slow, just to keep the mosquitoes in check. And so there was always that. I think the worst smelling was the Mill Creek, because some of the industries located there use it as an open dump, And but I'm working on an article now about a place called the old Mill Creek House, which was a hotel, an inn, located down along where Spring Grove Cemetery is. And that was quite a mecca for people who wanted to come and show off and race their horses on Spring Grove Avenue, which was a very, very big sport back then, because they couldn't do that in Clifton, Upper Clifton, very well. They would get fined that people didn't want that kind of speed up here, But down there, like a racetrack. In fact, there was a racetrack where Old Chester Park was one time, and so it became an area. And but you had Spring Grove Cemetery, so you couldn't have too much stench. I think the visitors might have had a problem with that, but I don't know. I had a paper mill down there, Sabin Robbins, and then the other, the regular Miller mill down there. It was a flour mill, I assume, back in the 1840s or so, but I don't think that was around in much past 1850 or so. I don't know.
Do you know about the history of the fish log? There's a house down there on Spring Grove. It's a bar now, but it looked like it was an old hotel in a roadhouse, and they have a sign on the side that says the famous fish log.
Oh, that was actually a railroad building. I think it was, I don't know if it was a Louisville, Nashville, or one of those railroads built that as a hotel for their employees. The railroad would have to have people that would travel. Spring Grove, Kentucky is another place that they would have to have like little hotels for their people that would lay over. They would, work a shift. Maybe they came from Cleveland or something, and you get off at Cincinnati. Oh, and here you go there, and you stay there tonight. So it's kind of done in that originally. That's what it was. Yeah, as a hotel for railroad workers, and then of course later it became, more of a restaurant, bar, and who knows what. So, but that's what it was built. I always wondered that myself, because the place that I'm trying to research now was called the Mill Creek House, and that was more of what I'm looking for. That was more of a on the wild side kind of a place, you know. So that should be interesting to find out more about.
Well, eventually, as the sewer, the metropolitan sewer district separates the storm drain from the sewer drains, the Mill Creek will become cleaner and cleaner. And I can see tubing down the Mill Creek right by Spring Grove pretty soon, all the way down to the Ohio.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. But you know, just if you have too much algae formation too, that could be a big issue. And they, I remember when the canal, you could still, I mean, as a kid growing up in Clifton, you could go around and find stretches of the canal still there with water in them, especially along lower St. Bernard. And all the kids, all the boys would come there to swim. You know, no one thought anything of it. And but it was a place of recreation. My great grandfather used to drive the mule to pull the canal boats as a kid. They would give a kid, you know, like 50 cents or something to go maybe 20 miles, you know, ride a mule that would pull the canal boats down. So they'd have those kind of switch hitters every so often, and they usually got boys to do that because it was cheap. And you could also ice skate from at least St. Bernard all the way down to Cincinnati on the canal. Then too. A lot of people did. It was a big ice skating area too. You could ice skate for miles. You know.
Well, this is a lot of fascinating history of Clifton. I hope this broadcast has perked a little bit everybody's attention about the old buildings that are still here. And we'll get you on the show next time when your article comes out, and we'll keep on following up on Clifton history. Geoff?
Sure. Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thanks a lot for
Thank you.
being interviewed, and we'll sign off here from Clifton Live in the cafe of Clifton Market. All right. Our job is done.
Where is that?